Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving right into one of the most incredible, mind-blowing stories of human endurance. I want you to picture this for a second. You are standing right in the middle of the Ice Age. Snow is stretching in absolutely every direction. Ice covers the rivers, it coats the rocks. There is frozen water as far as your eyes can see. And yet, in exactly 3 days, you're going to be dead. Not from the freezing cold, not from some saber-toothed predator, but from thirst. It sounds completely insane, right? How on earth do you die of thirst in a world quite literally made of water? You are surrounded by it. But this deadly paradox was very real. In fact, this was the single deadliest problem your ancient ancestors ever faced. For more than 100,000 years, every human alive had to fight a brutal daily war for water they could actually drink. And the terrifying part? The more snow and ice around them, the harder that fight became. Frozen water didn't save ancient humans. It actively tried to kill them. So you might be thinking, okay, why not just grab a handful of snow and eat it? Well, it comes down to a really deadly math problem. 37 degrees Celsius. That is your core body temperature. Snow obviously sits way below freezing. So when you swallow raw snow, your body has to heat that snow up before it can use even a single drop of it. And where exactly does that heat come from? It's stolen right from your core. Every mouthful of snow violently robs the precious heat that is keeping your heart beating and your brain alive. The result? Hypothermia. In a normal climate, eating snow might just give you brain freeze or feel uncomfortable. But in the Ice Age, it was a literal death sentence. You weren't quenching your thirst, you're just freezing yourself from the inside out. And hey, this isn't just dusty ancient history either. This exact rule, never eat raw snow, is still strictly taught in modern survival manuals today, including the U.S. Army's own field guide. Prehistoric humans had to learn this brutal lesson fast. You can never trust the easy answer.
But honestly, that rule created a much deeper problem. If you can't eat the snow, you absolutely need liquid water. But finding liquid water in a frozen wasteland is only half the battle, because they were up against a silent, invisible killer. And the biology behind this is absolutely fascinating. It's called peripheral vasoconstriction. Basically, when you get dangerously cold, your body pulls all its blood inward to protect your vital organs. Suddenly, your core is just flooded with blood. Your brain reads that massive flood and thinks, hey, awesome, I have plenty of fluid, and it just switches off your thirst alarm completely.
So you stop feeling thirsty entirely, but here's the catch. You are still losing water constantly. It's like an invisible drain. When you exhale on a cold winter day and you see that white mist of breath? That is your body's water literally leaving you. You lose it sweating under heavy furs while you're trekking across the ice. Scientists call this cold-induced dehydration. You feel perfectly fine, right up until the moment you collapse. Ice Age survival literally meant forcing yourself to drink before your body even asked for it. You were fighting a battle you couldn't even feel. So how did they win this impossible battle? Well, it started with engineering fire without wood. Fire is basically what gave ancient humans water, but fire obviously needs fuel. We always kind of imagine the Ice Age as these endless snowy pine forests, right? But researchers have found that much of it was actually the mammoth steppe. This was a vast, frozen grassland that was shockingly dry. It was essentially a frozen desert. Trees were incredibly rare. So our ancestors had to become brilliant survival engineers. They figured out how to burn animal bone packed with fat, which surprisingly burns incredibly hot. They burned dried animal dung. They burned twisted bundles of dry grass. Every single fire was a desperate calculation. Do you burn this super precious fuel for warmth, for cooking, or to melt your water?
Because that fuel was so incredibly scarce, they absolutely could not afford to waste it melting the wrong kind of ice. To us, a frozen river is just a frozen river. To them, it was a highly detailed survival map. They figured out that clear blue ice was old, dense, and gave them the most water for the fuel they spent. Cloudy white ice, on the other hand, was totally full of trapped air and snow. It yielded way less water and wasted their precious fuel. Reading the ice correctly meant calculating the exact fuel-to-water ratio they needed just to keep the camp alive.
But even with bonfires, fuel was always running low. Early humans needed something better. They had to start tracking nature's hidden water.
To find these liquid lifelines across an unmapped frozen wilderness, they had to read nature's map. Think about it. Animals like mammoths, wild horses, and bison couldn't exactly melt snow over a fire either. They had to know where the liquid water was. So humans tracked them. They followed game trails worn deep into the earth by thousands of hooves. But they also learned to read the tiny clues. They'd look for birds flying unusually low at dusk. They'd watch for insects swarming in one very specific spot,
Or they'd spot slightly greener mosses that pointed right to an underground spring. These humans were arguably the greatest trackers who ever lived, reading these incredibly subtle directions written right across the land.
Okay, so once they actually found that water, a whole new problem popped up. How do you carry it? The next water source could be a full day's walk away across a frozen plain. It's totally wild to think about, but they basically invented portable water. They transformed the stomachs and bladders of hunted animals into canteens. Cleaned, dried, and carefully stitched, these leather pouches could hold liquid for days. They even used pieces of birch bark, meticulously folded and sealed tight with pitch. These were the very first water bottles in human history, crafted directly from the land itself.
And here is a stroke of just absolute genius. Carrying liquid water in the deep cold is messy, and if it spills on you, you die. So they let the water freeze solid inside the pouches on purpose. They would literally carry a solid block of clean, frozen water, easy to hike with, completely impossible to spill. Then, when night fell, they simply melted it beside the banked fire, or they warmed it with their own body heat while they slept bundled in their furs. They literally took the freezing cold, their biggest enemy, and turned it into a survival tool. It was portable Ice Age refrigeration.
But survival wasn't just a winter problem. When the brief summer thaw finally arrived, water was suddenly everywhere as the glaciers melted. But this brought a brand new hidden danger: glacial flour. This is a superfine rock dust that gets suspended in glacial meltwater, turning it a cloudy gray color. If you drink it, it can severely wreck your stomach. And in a world with zero medicine, a bad stomach meant weakness, and falling behind meant death. So they had to get really smart, actively seeking out fast-moving rivers or sticking to fresh snow to avoid that rock dust and any deadly parasites.
Finding safe water, though, was really only half the battle. The other half, internal body conservation, meaning not wasting a single drop of the water already inside their bodies. They moved slow and steady on their long treks. If they moved too fast, they'd sweat. Sweating in heavy furs meant soaking your clothes, which could easily freeze and kill you, but it also meant losing precious body water. They learned to strip off layers before overheating, and they covered their mouths in the brutal cold to physically trap the moisture from every single breath. They treated every drop of internal water as completely sacred.
And this deep, hard-won wisdom, it isn't just a thing of the ancient past. We can see it perfectly preserved today. The Inuit peoples of the Arctic mastered water in ways that directly echo our Ice Age ancestors. They melt snow over a klauik, which is a traditional stone lamp burning seal fat. But their greatest secret is multi-year sea ice. Now, sea ice is frozen ocean, so normally it should be way too salty to drink, right? But the Inuit know that old sea ice, ice that has survived more than one single year, actually slowly drains its salt out over time. An elder can point to a specific block of frozen ocean and know for a fact it will melt into fresh, totally safe drinking water.
Which brings us to a really fascinating concept: the living library.
Without written language, without Google Maps or books, how did this incredibly precise, life-saving knowledge survive? It survived entirely through the elders. Think of this knowledge as a living library, passed down orally, around the fire, generation after generation. In these hunter-gatherer societies, an elder wasn't viewed as a burden. They were literally the most valuable asset the group had. They were walking survival guides, a walking record of every single water source for 100 miles in any direction. If you lost an elder, you lost the map. You lost knowledge that had been curated for thousands of years. They protected this knowledge like treasure because it was quite literally the difference between life and death.
When you put all this together, you really start to grasp the relentless, day-long grind these people faced. Just think about this brutal daily math. You wake up freezing and your very first job is coaxing the fire back to life. Then you spend hours melting snow painstakingly slowly just to get a few cups of water. Then you set out across a frozen plain, reading the land just to find a real liquid source. You carry it all the way back, taking half your day just for water. You conserve every single drop, and then you wake up and do the whole shebang again tomorrow. Water was never just free, it was earned.
And yet, despite this unbelievably brutal daily math, they didn't just survive, they thrived. For over 100,000 years, this living library kept our species alive. It's a completely awe-inspiring, unbroken survival streak. Through every winter, every drought, across a completely frozen world. And this is the part that should really just stop you in your tracks. Every single one of your ancestors passed this test. If just one single link in that massive chain had broken, if one ancestor had failed to find water, you literally would not exist today.
But look, the danger absolutely remains. That invisible threat of cold-induced dehydration, it still kills modern hikers, skiers, and soldiers today. People in cold environments still get dangerously dehydrated because their bodies still lie to them, switching off their thirst mechanism completely. That is exactly why modern survival experts are out there today still teaching the exact same ancient Ice Age rules. Never eat raw snow, always melt it first, and drink before you even feel thirsty. Our ancient biology hasn't changed, and those survival rules, they still fundamentally apply to us today.
We carry their ancient solutions inside us, but let's be honest, we've largely forgotten the struggle. We turn a tap without a single thought. We honestly waste more water before breakfast than they probably found in a week. The absolute hardest problem in human history has been completely forgotten in just a few generations of pipes and plumbing. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. Next time you turn on a tap, will you take a second to remember the ancient geniuses who fought for every single drop just so you could exist? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep that curiosity flowing.